Welcome back to my channel. It is so good to have you back here again for another episode. And if you are new here, hello and welcome. You are watching True Crime and Chill, where I come to talk about some very interesting and very shocking crime cases ever. And so if you would like to keep chilling with me every week when I upload a new episode, then I would highly recommend that you subscribe to the channel and also you follow me on my other socials so you never ever miss any future uploads. Now, before I get into this week's case, I have to give out a content warning that in this case, I will be talking about physical abuse, sexual abuse, as well as murder. So if you are sensitive to that kind of content, then viewer discretion is very much advised. Now let's get into the case. This week's case was actually suggested to me by a good friend of mine. Her name is Hope. So shout out to you, Hope, for giving me this case. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And also, if you would also like to suggest a case to me every now and then, you can go ahead and drop it down in the comment section or look in the description box. I've put my contact details right at the bottom of the description box, and that's how you can contact me. But yeah, thank you, Hope, for suggesting this case to me. I found it very interesting, and I'm so excited to talk about it right now. Today's case is about the sad and heartbreaking story of a woman by the name of Francis Rasuge. And Francis was from Hammanskraal, where she lived with her family. She lived with both her parents and her three other siblings. And they were a tight-knit family. They were really close, so close that whenever one of them would go somewhere or do something, the family would definitely know about it. So if one of them went somewhere, they would know where they went, with whom, and for how long. And that's how close the family was. It was a good family. They were all happy. And yeah, she was just a great woman from a great family. Frances was a police constable at the SAPS, and her colleagues described her to be someone who was very dedicated to her work, and she took it very seriously, so seriously that she would never do anything to jeopardize her job. She would never miss a shift without a valid reason, and she would never do anything that wasn't related to her job when she was at work. So she took it very seriously, and she was very passionate about what she did. At the time of this case, Francis was in a relationship with a man by the name of William Nkuna, and we're going to be talking a lot about William throughout the case as well. And according to William, he and Francis met in 1998. And at that time, Francis was a married man, and he had a couple of kids with his wife. But even though he was still a married man throughout the years, he never stopped trying to pursue Francis. And as a matter of fact, his wife even knew about this pursuit, and it turns out that his intentions were to make Francis his second wife. But eventually, Francis and William ended up getting in a relationship, and they hit things off, but it didn't take long for things to start going south. The relationship started having problems, and this is when things started taking a turn for the worse on Francis's side, to be specific. They would fight to a point where things would get very abusive, and physically, as a matter of fact. And William would just be very abusive towards Francis after they fight, and she would always sustain injuries from the beatdowns that he would give her. And William was described as a very scary person in that community where he lived. He lived in Temba, which is very close to Hammanskraal. So he was described as a very scary person. A lot of people feared him, and he wasn't really loved that much. But even though the relationship was a bit rocky, on the 31st of December in 2003, the couple decided to spend New Year's Eve together. They wanted to celebrate going into the new year together. And while this was happening, a fight broke out between them. They had an argument, and of course, as always, it ended up with William beating the living daylights out of Francis. And Francis sustained some injuries from this fight. Then after this incident, on the 1st of January in 2004, Frances decided to go back home to her family. And when she got home, her mother noticed that something was wrong, that something definitely happened to her daughter while she was at William's house. And then she ended up calling William to tell him to stay away from her daughter. And you won't believe what this guy said to her. You're not going to believe his response. He told her that he would rather kill Francis and then kill himself rather than let her go. I mean, this is her mother that he was speaking to, and he just tells her that I'd rather kill your daughter than let her go, and I'll kill myself as well after that. But of course, later on, he went on to deny this conversation ever happening. So between March and April of 2004, Frances then decided to get in the process of trying to move on with her life and forget about William and their relationship. But of course, William wasn't just going to let her go just like that. I mean, he just told her mom that he would rather kill her than let her go. So he kept on trying to pursue her even more. He kept on trying to harass her over and over so she can take him back. But she wasn't really interested anymore because later on she ended up getting in a relationship with another man, and it was a very good relationship. They were happy, he treated her well, and they went on to date for a few months before the disappearance of Francis Rasuge. And her new partner didn't really feel worried about William because he knew how much Francis hated the man now for everything he had done to her. And so he knew that she would never go back to him and she would never give him the time of day. So he never worried about her ex coming back for her because they were happy. They were in a good relationship. Everything was just going well. But then on the 10th of May in 2004, Francis filed a sexual assault charge against William. And she also got a restraining order against him. And of course, it didn't take long for William to convince her to drop these charges against him. I don't know how he did it, but somehow he managed to convince her to drop the sexual assault charges against him, as well as, okay, I don't know if he managed to convince her to drop the restraining order, but according to my research, he managed to convince her to drop the sexual assault charges she laid against him. Now let's get into the real story of this case, when things start happening. On August 27th of 2004, Frances was planning to go to the hairstylist to get a new hairdo. And after getting a new hairdo, she was going to go to her new boyfriend because they were planning to go to a funeral together on that weekend. But unfortunately, this would be the last day Frances would ever be seen alive. And the last person to see her was her brother before she left home, and her boyfriend never even got to see her again. The owner of the hair salon that Frances went to said that he did see her arrive at the salon because he would never make a mistake about it because of the fact that Frances always went to that hair salon to get her hair done. So he definitely saw her coming in and she was doing her hair. And then just a few moments later, William also got into the hair salon. He arrived at the hair salon and wanted to talk to Frances. So he went to her and wanted to know what her plans were, where she was planning on going. And Frances told her that she was going to the taxi rank after this because she had somewhere to go. And then William offered to give her a ride in his car, and he even paid for her new hairdo. And then after offering her a ride, she accepted the ride, but unfortunately, this would be the last time she would ever be seen alive. When she didn't show up at her new boyfriend's place like she was supposed to on that weekend, he got a bit worried and called her family and wanted to know if maybe she was still at home and she hadn't left yet. But they also told him that they hadn't heard from her as well. But they never really got worried. They thought maybe she had went somewhere real quick before heading over to her boyfriend's house because she was always a careful person, never taking risks, and she was always very calculating about her steps and where she goes and stuff like that. So they never got worried about anything until Sunday came around and it was time for her to be at her workplace to report in for a shift that she had to cover. But when her colleagues arrived at her house to pick her up and her family told them that she wasn't there, they started getting concerned that something could have happened. And remember what I told you at the beginning of the video? Her colleagues always described her as someone who was dedicated to her job, someone who took it seriously and who would never do anything to jeopardize it. So obviously this was very much out of character of her. And so they had every reason to worry that she hadn't been seen all weekend and she wasn't with her new boyfriend and she was supposed to have gone to a funeral with him. So this definitely was out of character for her, and they started to wonder if something could have happened to her. So now a missing persons case was filed for Frances, and now the search for her was starting. And as police were investigating, they went to the hair salon where she was last seen, and they spoke to the owner of the hair salon, and he told them that the last person to be seen with Frances was William because he came and picked her up in his car and they left together. So then they had an idea to try to track the phone that she had with her. And so they looked at the signal. They tried to track the signal of the phone via satellite, and they saw that it pinged around the taxi rank near ShopRite that she was going to go to, the shopping center in Hammanskraal that she was going to go to. And when they went to that place, they found the phone in the possession of someone else. And this person claimed that he bought this phone. And when they showed him the picture of the person they believed he could have bought it from, he identified the man as William Nkuna. So now apparently William had taken the phone that Francis was using and he sold it to someone. Why? But when William was questioned about this, he said it wasn't true. He said that Francis had given him the phone because his phone had broken down. But of course, this was another lie because when his phone was taken and inspected, it was found that the phone was actually working very well. And as a matter of fact, it showed, cell phone records showed that his phone had made a lot of phone calls on that day when Francis disappeared. So what was he talking about? Because his phone wasn't broken down. So obviously he was lying. So then they kept on investigating even more, and now they started looking at William from a very suspicious angle. And then something strange was discovered. It was found that 2 days after Frances went missing, her ATM cards were used to withdraw money from various ATMs around Hammanskraal. And when the CCTV footage of the ATMs were inspected, they found that the person who was making these withdrawals, his body was of a male buildup, and the police made deductions that this male buildup was quite similar to the buildup of William Nkuna. But again, William denied ever doing anything like that. And then on the 6th of September in 2004, the police decided to go inspect William's car since they were told that William came and picked her up in his car and gave her a ride. So they thought it was a good idea to go and look at his car, and maybe they could find a clue that would tell them what happened to her. And as they were inspecting the car, they went to the trunk or the boot of the car, and in the boot, they found blood. And when the blood was taken down to the lab to go get inspected, it was found that the blood belonged to Francis Rasuge. So William was then charged on suspicion of causing the disappearance of Francis, but of course he tried to explain himself out of the situation, and his explanation is quite ridiculous, if I should say so myself. He said to the police that the reason there is blood on that mat is because he and Francis were having sex when he took out the mat out of the boot. And when he took it out, they had sex on top of it, and she was on her periods. So that must be her menstrual blood. But of course, the blood was taken down to get tested on, and they found that it doesn't make any sense that it's menstrual blood. It is actually blood from veins and her blood vessels. But keep this in mind, guys. Keep this in mind. He was only arrested on the suspicion of causing the disappearance of Francis Rasuge because they couldn't really prove that he caused her to disappear, and they couldn't really prove that it was a murder, that she was murdered. Even though they found her blood on the mat of his car, they couldn't prove that he actually killed her. Had they found her blood on maybe something that could have been used as a weapon, maybe a knife or a hammer or any tool that could be hard enough to cause harm, then they would have had reason or probable reason to believe that this could have turned into a homicide and he could have been responsible for her murder. So this time he was only charged on suspicion of causing her disappearance. So now the police had one more thing to look into in order to try to make sense of the disappearance of Francis. They decided to look at a term known as victimology, which talks about studying the behavior and the nature of a missing person or a victim. They would basically look at the things that this person would normally do or what kind of person they are. If maybe they were always outgoing, if they were risk-taking, or if they would usually disappear for long periods of time without telling anyone, without saying a word even to their family. And when they looked at the victimology profile of Francis, they got to see that it didn't really match what had happened here. Because remember, Francis was from a family that always communicated with each other about their whereabouts. about who they were with and how long they'd be gone for. And this time she said nothing to no one. And she was never the type of person to take these kind of risks. She was never the type of person to just miss work without a valid reason. So the victimology profile of Francis wasn't really matching, that she could have just went away somewhere and she'll be back at a certain time. So now police were having even more reason to believe that something sinister could have happened to Francis. But unfortunately, on the 3rd of March in 2005, the police had to let William Nkuna go because the charges that were laid against him on the suspicion of causing the disappearance of Francis had to be dropped because there wasn't just enough evidence. There wasn't really enough evidence to prove that he caused her disappearance or he caused her murder if she was murdered, because again, they still hadn't found her body. Now, I know you would say, what about the blood that was found in his car? Look, yes, the blood was found in his car, but anything could have happened, okay? And the blood was attempted to be cleaned off. So maybe the police didn't really find a lot of blood. And had there been any blood spatter, they would have been able to study the blood splatter and see that, okay, something could have happened. There could have been strikes that were done on her. Maybe she was hit with something and her blood just splattered all over the place. But the car was almost cleaned of the blood, and they found tiny samples that they took off and managed to test. So that really wasn't enough to prove that anything could have, that she really could have been killed or she could have been hurt by William. So they had to let him go due to not having enough evidence to lock him up. But a few weeks later, since the police really wanted to keep this guy in jail, they decided to lay a charge against him of fraud for using her ATM cards without her permission when it was found that he was the one who made all those withdrawals using her bank cards. So they charged him with fraud, and they backed this up by the fact that they had a witness who said he saw Francis at the ATM withdrawing money at that time using those ATM cards. So now they really wanted to keep him in custody, and so they used this charge of fraud to arrest him again. And if you really think about it, just think about this. If this guy had the guts to really go to ATMs, various ATMs, and use her cards to keep withdrawing money, then he must have done it knowing that there was no chance of Francis ever coming back to get him into trouble for it. He could have only done it knowing that she would never be seen again, if you seriously think about it. On the 2nd of April in 2005, Francis was then indicted, which means he was formally accused or charged of the murder of Francis Rasuge, and his trial began on the 1st of August in 2005, or so it was supposed to begin on the 1st of August in 2005, but then he decided not to show up at the trial, and this gave the police a reason to issue out a warrant for his arrest. But a week later, he handed himself over to the police, and that's when he finally got arrested for the murder of Francis Rasuge. His trial only took just about 10 days, and afterwards he was found guilty of the murder of Francis Rasuge, and he was given a life sentence in prison. And you could say that justice was served, right? But was it really though? Was it? Because Francis's body still hadn't been found, and her family couldn't bury her, and they couldn't find any closure. So was it really justice that was served even though he had been arrested and given a life sentence for her murder? So the police, didn't find Francis's body until 3 years later in 2007, when William's wife decided that she was going to sell their house and move away with her kids. She just wanted to get the hell out of there because she didn't want to be associated with William anymore. And she sold the property, and as soon as the new owners of the property moved in, they wanted to renovate the place and make it the way they wanted to. So they called some construction workers to come work on the house, and as well as the yard as well. And when the construction workers were digging on one particular day, they came across some human remains. The police were called to the property, and when they looked at these remains, they saw that they were duct taped together. And so this person must have been tied up before they were killed. And the bones were taken to go get studied, And then it was confirmed that these were the human remains of Francis Rasuge. So it took 3 damn years to find her body. And when it was found, it was just in the guy's backyard near his garage. For 3 years, he kept her there and told no one about it, and no one even knew. But thank God she was found, because now her family could have a proper funeral and a proper burial for her. So now we know for sure that it was definitely him who killed Francis, because the remains were found in his house, in his backyard, and also he had every reason to kill her. She dumped him, and he was very abusive towards her, and he was very possessive and obsessive, so much so that he didn't want to let her go. He kept trying to pursue her over and over, even after she had left him. And remember what he said to her mother, that he would rather kill her and then kill himself than ever let her go. But he never followed up on the second part of that plan, which is killing himself. But he was arrested and he was given life in prison, and to this day, he's still rotting in prison, which I hope he does, because this guy he was just heartless. But yeah, justice was finally served. But yeah, guys, that was the case that I had for you guys this week. The heartbreaking story of Constable Francis Rasuge, a woman who just wanted to serve her country, to serve and protect the citizens of South Africa, and was just simply murdered, was just brutally murdered by a man who had so much selfishness that he would never let her go, that he never wanted her to be happy without him. And if he couldn't have her, then no one else could. But I'm just happy that he got arrested and he's serving the sentence that he deserves in prison. And to the Rasuge family, I would like to say I am so sorry for your loss. I hope that you managed to find solace and happiness in the fact that justice was served for your daughter and for your sister. And I hope life is just going on well for you all. But that's a wrap for me, guys. And if you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. And again, please, if you are new here and you want to keep chilling with me every week, do subscribe to the channel and follow me on my other socials so you always know when I have a new episode ready for you. And I will see you again next week. Take care of yourself. Have a nice day. Cheers.